everybody. Like Sarah said, if you have any questions, you have comments as it goes along, please feel free to put stuff in the chat. Sarah's going to let me know if there is stuff in the chat so that we can kind of have some conversation. I'm going to go through a bunch of material today. It's going to be kind of quick so that we make sure we get everything covered. And we're just going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to get my screen shared and away we're going to go. So today we're talking about assisting veterans and families in community reintegration. And by the end of this session, what you'll be able to do is describe the Veteran Health Administration public health approach to suicide prevention and working with veterans, have knowledge of veteran culture, which enhances your alliance and effective work with veterans, be able to identify the impact of military service physically, psychologically, socially, and vocationally, which affects readjustment, and have knowledge of basic practices to assist veterans in civilian readjustment. So the first thing I want to say is thank you for this opportunity and thank you for your service. It's an honor to do these presentations. All the information that I have comes from listening to veterans talk about their own experiences and also my own experience with family members who are veterans. So one of the things I would encourage anyone to do who is a veteran, could you please enter that in the chat, your name, what branch of the service you served, what your job was in the military, and contact information if you're willing to let people be in touch with you. One of the things I always encourage people to do is to reach out to veterans if you're working with veterans and talk to them about their experiences and what it was like to be a veteran. A little bit about my role as a CPC. I'm part of the VA suicide prevention team. I do education like these. I go to outreach events and I build and join coalitions. And my role, again, is to reach the 11 to 17 veterans who die by suicide each day and are not engaged in VA care. There's a CPC in each VA nationally now. The light bulb went off and the VA found that 11 of 17 or 65% of the veterans who die by suicide are not using the VA and don't qualify. So they put somebody like me in each VA nationally so that I can go out into the community, help people who are not working for the VA understand how to work with veterans. And this has really helped with the mental health of veterans and suicide prevention. And the model is community-based plus clinically based is the full public health model. So I do the community-based work. There's suicide prevention coordinators and case managers in the hospitals and mental health workers who work with our veterans on their mental health needs. And that's the full public health model. So what's happened since we took a public health approach? The number of suicides reached a peak in 2017. And then what happened since then is every year since then, the number of veterans who die by suicide has decreased every year. So it has been effective for me to go into the community, and it has been effective for you to learn more about veterans and what veteran culture is about. One of the things that I encourage everybody to do every single time I talk is to look at the people don't care what you know until they know how much you care. If you don't do anything else during this hour, there's a couple of things I'm asking you to do. One is to sit back for a minute while you're listening to me, when you get bored, and think about why it is that you do the work that you do in your particular agency, and also why it is that you want to work with veterans. For me, I've spent 30 years doing mental health work. I started my career in Virginia Beach, working with retired military and military families. I've been a federal employee in 3 different VAs in Huntsville, Nashville, and Clarksburg. I also became a caregiver at a pretty young age for someone with acute PTSD, which gave me some pretty good insight into what it's like to have PTSD and also what it's like to be a family caregiver of someone with PTSD. My husband of 22 years was a Navy nuclear submarine veteran. My father was a Korean War veteran, and my father-in-law was a World War II Purple Heart recipient. The submarine that you see at the bottom is the USS Lapon. It's since been retired, and that was the submarine that my ex-husband spent the majority of his time serving on. The other thing I ask you to do, one thing is to think about why you do what you do. The other thing I ask you to write down while you're sitting there and when you get bored, what do you do to take care of yourself? The kind of jobs that we have as social workers are hard jobs, they're emotionally draining jobs. And I encourage you to get out some scratch paper, write down your passion for the work that you do, and then write down what it is you do to take care of yourself. Not what you say you're going to do, but what is it you're actually doing. I spend time on my flower gardens, spent time with my horse Nugget. My dogs are Letty and Sealy. And this is my son, my family members, my son, who's 23 now, and this is usually how I see him, either waving hello or goodbye. He's always coming and going. This is my dad, who's the Korean War veteran. Insight into military culture goes a long way in building alliances and to help you with the work that you do with veterans. This is a quote from a very wise veteran that I've actually changed a little bit to shorten it. A common transition challenge is relating to people that have no idea how to understand or empathize what military personnel have experienced. So if you're going to work with veterans, one of the things a veteran is going to ask is that you have some insight and some understanding of what it is that they do when they're in the military day to day. This picture is actually a picture probably of a Vietnam veteran, and this is the Vietnam Veteran Wall. How do we learn about veteran culture? As I told you, I'm not a veteran myself, but one of the things that I've done in my 7 years with the VA is I've listened to veterans tell their story. I've listened to veteran family members, and I've just done a lot of time, spent some time just thinking about what it is they're saying and kind of let it sink in that what it would really be like to serve in the military. I use a lot of pictures in my presentations, and I'm going to read a story that's called Gone But Not Forgotten. This is a story that was given to me, gifted to me by our medical center director. Her daughter was in middle school, actually, when she interviewed a veteran, and she wrote this, this essay. And then what we did, I worked with Ben Mindsey, who's a retired Army First Sergeant, EOD, worked with him to tweak it a little bit to make sure that we got all the facts correct. But this story is about what it's like to serve in the military. Before we do that, I want you to take a look at this picture and really absorb what's in this picture. This is somebody in combat, some veterans in combat. And I want you to think about the weather today outside and the fact that it's going to be close to 100 degrees. These men and women who serve right now and are deployed are working in 100+ degree weather day after day after day. I want you to take a look at what these people have on and the fact that it's 100 degrees outside. They have on long sleeve shirts. They have on sappy vests to keep them safe. And they have long pants on. They have boots on. They have helmets on, and they're carrying guns that are, a couple pounds each. So I want you to think about what it would be like for you to be outside for 8 to 10 hours today, outside for 8 to 10 hours, and think about what you would be wearing if you went outside today. And would that be the outfit that you would choose? So if you don't listen to anything else or do anything else with me today, please sit back for just a minute. It's about a 5-minute story I'm going to read. It's called Gone But Not Forgotten. Brian is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps with 8.5 years of service to our country. Coming from a long line of military families covering every branch of the service for 4 generations, he entered a Marine Corps delayed entry program at age 16. He will tell you that 9/11 was the event in his life that solidified his reason to join. He endured 3 deployments to Iraq, serving in the role of an infantry mortarman. He told me that the worst thing he remembers is that good young men were dying over there. It was a tragedy to be taken so young. You think of how much good they could have done for society. Brian vowed that his comrades may be gone, but they wouldn't be forgotten. Brian describes some of his first deployment days as living out of power plant barracks with no hot water to shower, no roof over their heads, or if there was a roof, it leaked. During his second deployment, he lived out in the open, slept in old schools or in the back of a truck. They bathed with baby wipes. During the winter, the temperature dropped to 40 degrees at night. In the summertime, it went as high as 120 degrees. They were required to carry 60 to 80 pounds of gear with them all day long, and they wore sappy plates in their jackets to prevent injury from shrapnel, which is fragments of a bomb shell or other explosive parts that could cause injury. These sappy plates weighed an additional 30 pounds, so you could be carrying around an extra 140 pounds with you all day long. No amount of preparation readies you for war. Training is not like the real thing. Brian said, you are literally scared shitless. He shared that one has to always be sharp, thinking on your feet. You have rounds coming in all around you. Your survival skills kick in and you learn to react and think about it later. He told me, I had a very heavy responsibility on top of all that, to keep my Marines safe and bring them home. That is a huge expectation for a young man. Brian said that after seeing combat, you were changed forever. He said all the life events that you will take seriously, such as getting married, having a baby, buying a house, none of it is serious after seeing combat. All those other things seem so minuscule in comparison. Then Brian said, if none of that is bad enough, you come home and life has passed you by. Things are not the same. People are not the same. It's as if you're in a time warp and somehow you don't fit in anywhere. People don't understand you. You don't understand them. Life for you is so different and no one can understand where you've been, what you've seen, or what you've done. You struggle with emotions of being a failure, getting out when your comrades are still there, like you deserted them, feeling responsible for those you lost under your watch. But the best you can do is vow to yourself that their stories will not be untold. They will not be forgotten. Brian learned that war is devastating to the body, mind, and soul. Your fate is never really known. Will you live? Will you die? Will you come home and ever see your loved ones again? Will you ever be the same person after having that experience? I learned that the value of what our servicemen and women do for us and our freedom can never be repaid. Brian said that he saw the best in people during the worst and most inhumane times. Brian shared an anecdotal story about children who were living in terrible conditions. If you gave them the smallest things like a piece of candy, you would have thought you'd given them pure gold. I could tell that the effects of the experience of war will be with Brian for a very long time, and that he experienced things that were very hard for him, things that threatened tears in the eyes of a grown man. The greatest thing I learned from Brian is that even though our men and women are gone, we must never forget them and what they have done for us. So next time you see a service member, thank them and appreciate them for what they do for us each and every day. Because while we sleep in our comfortable beds at night, Brian and his comrades are watching over us, sleeping in truck beds, living in very hot and cold conditions, and dodging the next gunfire or explosive that may take their life. So that's Brian's story. Think about that, digest that, and let's move on and talk a little bit more about veteran culture. I want you again to look at that picture on the right-hand side. When a veteran tells you that they have pain, aches and pains in their back and their knees and their shoulders, I want you to think about what that would be like for you. It's again 100 degrees outside, probably in this picture. That truck is a big metal truck. It's got tires on it, and there's not a paved road. So what happens with these service members is, first of all, to get in that truck, you climb in. There's not a lot of steps to get into those. You get in there, you sit on this metal seat, and there aren't a lot of shocks in there, and you are driving over that road, and every time you hit a bump on that road, it's jarring your back. Every time you jump in and out of that thing onto that hard ground, it's jarring your knees. So when a service member tells you that they have pains in their backs, pains in their knees, you have to think about what it was like to be in that armored vehicle, traveling hour after hour. When people are in the service and they're traveling like that, their main goal is to not hit a mine and not get shot at while they're driving down the road in that thing. So they're a lot less concerned about the aches and pains that they're causing. So what do we call our military people? If someone's in the Army, you're going to call them soldier. If they're in the National Guard, they're a soldier or airman, the reservists, military reserve. Marines, you call them Marines. Sailors are in the Navy, airmen are in the Air Force, and Coasties are Coast Guardsmen. The majority of people that we see in West Virginia, my experience has been, are either Army or Marines. So you'd probably be calling the majority of veterans or service people that you work with soldiers or Marines. The next thing is that if you're working with a soldier or Marine, you're going to, if you want to know what their job is, ask them what their MOS is. It's interesting that if you say, what's your MOS, instead of what's your job, you get kind of this immediate eye contact and kind of a smile comes across someone's face because it's kind of an acknowledgement that you have some understanding of veteran culture. They're going to come back and shoot back what their letters and numbers were: 35 Mike, 31 Bravo, 25 Bravo. And since I wasn't military, I have no idea what those mean. And then you just ask, what is 35 Mike? And they will gladly tell you. Ask soldiers about their rating. They're not going to tell you what an MOS is, but they're going to tell you what a rating is. Once again, I want you to look at that picture and look at the pack that that guy's carrying. That's probably over 100 pounds that's on his back. Also think about the fact that 20% of our military right now are women. Women and men carry the same packs. If you think about the average woman who is between 18 and 25 when people are serving, that woman is probably weighing 100 to 125 pounds, which means she at least weighs what the pack does or the pack outweighs her. When a military woman tells you that she has shoulder pain, back pain, hip pain, knee pain, think about the fact that day after day, week after week, month after month, she was carrying that pack that at least weighs and maybe outweighs her. hour after hour after hour. Think about the fact that they have 100 pounds on their back, and when you're in a helicopter and you're sent in to a place to land, they don't land the helicopter. They bring the helicopter close to the ground, and you jump out so that helicopter can take off and go back out without getting shot at. So these military guys have 100 pounds on their back, and they're jumping out of a helicopter that just barely stopped moving and is hovering over the ground. And think about that, what that would be like for your back or your knees. When you want to talk with veterans, you're going to ask them where they were stationed, where their bases were. If you're working with a Marine or a soldier, they're going to tell you what the base name is. Where were you stationed? I was in Fort Carson. Where are you stationed? I was in Fort Sill. Where were you stationed? Camp Pendleton. And so when I was working with veterans directly, I would have this map up on my wall because my start in my career was with Navy. My exposure in my own family was Navy. So I had very little exposure to where the Army bases were, had the map up there so that the veteran could then point to where that was. If it was a base that wasn't on the map, we'd go ahead and put a pin there and I'd add it. So familiarize yourself to where the Army bases primarily and the Marine bases were. This is where the bases of the Navy, a lot of the main Navy bases are. And if you ask somebody from the Navy where they were stationed, they're going to give you a town. Don't know why that happens, but it's interesting over time that, you kind of sort that out. Where you stationed, Army Marines are going to tell you a base most probably. Navy, where you stationed, they're going to tell you a time. The majority of Navy people, from what I've known, they do a lot of their training either in the Northeast or in Florida. A lot of our guys that I work with, and well, mostly men at the VA, in West Virginia, a lot of them are Vietnam era veterans, and it seemed like they did a lot of their training out of the West Coast because Vietnam would then be being shipped off the West Coast to get to Vietnam for their deployments. If you're going to talk with veterans, have some idea about the countries and where it is they fought. The most recent wars were the OEF wars. And those were fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, which is here and here. The Gulf War was fought primarily in Kuwait. As you can see, Afghanistan and Iraq are kind of in sand worlds, and Kuwait is actually sitting more on a coastal region. So get kind of familiar with that. For you and me, when I think about those three wars, I just kind of clump them all as, a bunch of sandy, hot desert. But people who are stationed there, you have to think about the fact that these countries, Afghanistan and Iraq, are actually as far apart as West Virginia and Colorado, or as far apart as Rhode Island and Florida. So think about how many different cultures you go through in the United States if you would get in your car and drive from West Virginia to Colorado. How many different cultures you go through and how many different kinds of terrain and environments you go through, even dialect, different accents. If you go from Rhode Island through New York, through West Virginia, through the Carolinas, and go down the coast through Georgia to get to Florida. And then think about the fact that Iraq and Afghanistan are not only that far apart, these are different countries with different languages, with different politics, with different religious bases. So when you ask a soldier or a sailor or someone from any of the branches of the military about where they served, for you, it's going to seem like just a clump of a sand area. But for them, they want to tell you about what the culture was like in that particular. They'll tell you the city, they'll tell you what it was like. People who are in the military don't want to talk to you about the fighting part. They won't talk about whether people died, whether people were killed. They can't talk to you about the classified information in detail. But what they do like to talk about, I have found, is what was it like where you were stationed? What were the people like? What was the terrain like? What was the villages like where you were? Vietnam is the same way. If we're working with Vietnam veterans, they will tell you the name of the town where they were stationed, and they'll tell you about that town. So think about those countries, think about the different cultures, and think about asking those kinds of questions. Again, you don't want to ask a soldier or a sailor about the wartime as much as you want to talk about what was that experience like to be deployed. This is one of the main slides. Again, this is a slide I would hold on to if I were you. Military culture I live by. If you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. If you want to get off on the wrong foot with a veteran, show up 5 minutes late for an appointment with them. If you can, be ready 10 minutes ahead of time. If you're going to be late, explain to them what happened, apologize profusely, and don't be late again. If that's your pattern to show up to every appointment 5 minutes late, you're going to have military people who go into an appointment where they're not happy with you. Use titles and names. That was a switch for me. Doing 30 years of mental health work, one of the things you do with a lot of mental health work is you tend to call your clients or patients by their first name. When you work with military people, it's kind of an automatic shift. It was a slow transition for me, but I found myself calling veterans by their last name. And I think it comes from how you're referred to while you're in the military. But I ended up using Mr., Ms., Doctor, whatever their title is, and their last name rather than a more familiar first name. Respect the flag and the national anthem. One of the stories I like to tell is my husband of 22 years, was a Navy veteran, as I told you, 12 years. And everywhere we went, we had season tickets or regular tickets to national football games, the Chiefs, the Eagles, the Titans, the Tennessee Titans, the Texans. Anywhere we lived, we would end up in a lot of football games. And God forbid if they played the national anthem and the people around us didn't stand up, didn't face the flag, didn't take their hat off. Because people who are in the military, they fight for that flag, they fight for that national anthem, and they have an expectation that everyone's going to respect that. At the VA, the national anthem is played every day about 7:30 in the morning. The expectation is that when that national anthem is being played, you can be walking down the hall, you can be late to a meeting, and you dead stop. You listen to the music and you turn either towards the music or towards the flag, whatever it is that you see. If that's not happening, you can count on the fact that veterans report that to our administration, and we get another email about the fact that it's our obligation as veteran employees to respect that flag and that national anthem. Expect the cursing, communicate matter-of-factly. The veterans are going to do that. There's going to be a lot of joking and poking, and just think about all that when you're working with veterans. The medals that you see are actually my father-in-law's medals. He was a World War II veteran. There's a Purple Heart there and a bunch of other medals. If you're working with a veteran, one of the things you can ask, especially if you're in their home, is where are your medals? Let them explain to you what each one of those medals are for. If you're working with a veteran, these are actually, the background of that is my mother-in-law's kitchen table. You can see the placemats there, a cord to a computer and stuff. But we were sitting there drinking coffee one day and just said, where are the medals? She had them in a drawer, stashed away. She pulled them out, and they were just in a drawer. And one of the things you can do for military people is say, hey, do you need some assistance getting those mounted? Would you like me to work with the VFW or the American Legion with you, and maybe we can get them mounted in a shadow box? Military slang that you can live by, that you might hear is the DD-14. And that's the golden ticket. That's a piece of paper that every military person has and is told to hold on to. That shows that you were in the military. It shows when you went in, it shows when you got out, and that's your proof that allows you to get veteran benefits. If someone doesn't have a DD-214, you can actually be in touch with our VA or any VA in the enrollment office and talk with them about how it is that you might be able to get hold of their DD-214. My dad died in the last 6 months, and actually his DD-214 helped us get a flag for him. And they asked the funeral home for that. So that's something that any veteran should have in their possession and should carry around with them. You've got the FOB, which is a forward operating base. The COPs are the bases that are actually in war zones, in combat zones, and less safe. IEDs are improvised explosive devices. And then I'm going to get to some more of the rest of it. The other thing is the CHU is another one that comes up a lot, and that's a containerized housing unit. When you're deployed, a lot of times there isn't housing for you, and they actually move in like the back of the tractor trailers, those big metal containers. Those are actually brought in on tractor trailers, and then that becomes your sleeping quarters while you're deployed. The COP is the combat outpost, the small base. And if someone says they've been in a COP, if they're in a COP, they are probably in a combat zone. Another term that you're going to hear is inside and outside the wire. If someone is inside the wire, they're actually on base. if they're outside the wire, they're off base. When you're deployed, inside the wire still is not a very safe place. I had one veteran tell me a story about watching one of his comrades get shot. They were inside the wire. They were mechanics working on some big piece of military equipment, and a sniper actually shot his comrade while they were doing their machinist work, and they just drug him behind some machinery and got him taken care of by the medic. But inside the wire is not even a safe place when you're actually deployed. But that's another term that'll come up, the inside, the outside the wire. Excerpts from 5 things military veterans want civilians to know. A lot of veterans with PTSD were young when they experienced trauma. I want you to think about what it was like between 18 and 20 years old for you, if you're young. Think about what 18 to 20 was like for your kids, if you're not young. And think about the fact that my kid, who's 23 now, at 18, went away to college. He had a meal ticket. His responsibilities were get to class, do his studying, get himself up and dressed in the morning. And think about the fact that these 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds are being deployed, and they're watching people that they're close to get shot and killed. They're watching things blow up. They're concerned about whether they're going to live or die every night. So PTSD happens for these young guys a lot of times because their brain and their maturity level it doesn't allow them to really absorb what it is that's going on around them. So there's just a lot of impact and effect. We're still normal people. Our brains just function differently. When people come back from the military, from deployment, they're in a fight or flight mode. And it's fight, flight, or fawn now. So you either fight, you fly, or you freeze. And when we work with PTSD outside of military people, a lot of times the groups that I worked with before I started with the VA would either be in freeze or they would be in flight. So they'd be running from the trauma, or they would be frozen so they can't move forward. A lot of military people, it's a fight. They come back, and what happens with their PTSD, with their their hypervigilance, all has to go into fight mode. And then think about what that's like when you bring a military person into your office and they have PTSD or they just come back from deployment. One of the cardinal rules of therapy is always sit closest to the door if you're doing mental health work so that you can get out. If the person that you're working with tends to escalate or has an escalation episode, one of the things you're going to do is fight with a veteran for that seat near the door, because when they come into your office, they're going to look for, where's the window? They're going to sit so that the window, nobody can shoot them through a window. They're going to look to where the door is, and they're going to make sure that they have the best escape route. So think in terms of that as you sit down at your normal spot right by the door, you're going to have veterans coming in who are going to want that same spot next to the door so that they have the escape route. When someone's in the military, they go out to eat. It's a natural thing. They sit down, they're looking for escapes. They're scanning the room to see if anybody looks like they're unsafe. All those things that we wouldn't think about. I ran a Vietnam veteran group when I was first working in Virginia Beach, and my office was an old hotel room. And it was interesting because I went in the first day and I wanted there to be a circle of veterans. Let's support each other. They're Vietnam vets. And 3 of my walls had windows. So I went in and everyone sat with their back to the wall. And I had 3 sides of that room to myself because nobody besides me would sit with my back to the windows. The way veterans speak is not meant to be rude. Again, they're going to swear. They're going to be very upfront about what they're saying. And you kind of have to think that's the way it's going to be and just kind of adapt to that. And you spend more time with your brothers and sisters in arms than you do with your family. Veterans come back from military people come back, and they had this very tight unit of very small group of people that they were really close to. And one of the things you want to think about is that veterans want to reestablish that kind of a tight-knit group with somebody. And hopefully they can find a way to connect with other people in the civilian world and have that same feeling of camaraderie that they had. Military service effects on community reintegration. Hearing loss is one thing that I don't think I brought up, and that's with all eras. People who are in the military are around a lot of loud machinery, a lot of things going off and blowing up, around a lot of guns. They are issued hearing earplugs, but when you're worried about whether somebody's going to kill you or not, you need to think about those earplugs may be out. Things blow up, the earplugs are not in. They don't have the earplugs with them. The machinery is the same way. You've got to be able to hear what's going on around you. So the earplugs are not in a lot of times. So there's a lot of hearing loss. So if a veteran's looking at you like, hey, I don't understand, it may be that they actually haven't heard what you said. If they answer you in a way that doesn't make sense, it may be that they didn't hear what you said. And a lot of veterans do qualify for service connection for hearing loss. So if you're working with veterans, encourage them to at least look into whether that's a possibility, whether they can get service connection for hearing loss, which allows them to have hearing aids assessment through the VA. And a lot of people do qualify for hearing aids, if nothing else, at the VA. Chronic pain, we talked about that some. Physical handicaps. Nerve and heart conditions from the Vietnam War, that came from the Agent Orange. And the breathing and sinus problems from OAF, and Gulf War. You see the commercials just like I do, that we're doing a lot of screenings right now because people were breathing in a lot of chemicals they shouldn't have been breathing in, and they've got a lot of damage to their sinuses and lungs and heart from that. Take a look at this picture. Think about yourself during COVID. Think about the fact that you wore a mask in your office when you were working with veterans, or in the hospital if you're working in a hospital. And the minute you went in your office behind a closed door, you would pull that mask off. And think about the fact that you were working in heating and air conditioning, and the mask that you had on only covered your nose and your mouth. This is probably a Gulf War picture. And this guy, the Gulf War was a chemical war. So the guys who worked, or the women who worked in the military at that time, wore this kind of apparatus on their face because they didn't want the chemicals. If it was chemical war and they happened to get struck, they wouldn't want to be poisoned. So think about the fact again that it's probably 100 degrees out there. That guy is, I think it's a man, it might be a woman, is outside of that vehicle that's behind them. So they're working outside. It's 100 degrees outside. They have a plastic mask covering their face. They have a helmet on top of that. They're fully clothed, and they're trying to work, physically work outside for 8 hours a day with that mask on. And think about how you felt like you were suffocating when you just had a mask over your nose and your mouth in an environment where you were sitting in a chair most of the time, and it wasn't 100 degrees. Military service effects on community reintegration. The things that kept people alive in the military are things that don't serve them well on the outside. The hypervigilance that I talked about, the fact that service members a lot of times come into your office and sit down and they are concerned about the environment around them and what's going to happen. When they go outside and they're with their spouses, with their families, or eating out, when they're at work, that hypervigilance continues. Not sleeping, very common for military people. First of all, not sleeping kept you alive. The gun was in right under your head. It was right by your bed so that you could get to it if all of a sudden there was some kind of an attack. And that also, it's a 24-hour day schedule in the military, even if you're not deployed. So there's not a regular sleeping routine. So sleeping is difficult for people when they come back. Working until the job again is common in the military. So you're in the military, you're deployed, you have nothing else to do but to work and sleep. So when you get home, all of a sudden you're off deployment and you're back in your home setting, and you have to think about how to juggle work, leave the work because you need to get home to your kids because they have to get to soccer practice. You need to get home to dinner with your family. So it's kind of a shift in mentality that military people have to go through so that they adjust to kind of a work-home life rhythm. Authoritative toward others, following orders and rigid structure, and not asking for help. Those are other problems that affect community reintegration. Military service effects on community mitigation: PTSD, anxiety, depression, insomnia, alcohol and drug use, and thoughts of suicide. We're getting a little bit more now into the civilian world culture that can create veteran family community mitigation challenges. So the one thing is there's no clear chain of command when someone gets out of the military. You're kind of left to your own devices. You get a job in the community, and a military organization is very top down. You're told what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Don't ask a lot of questions. You get into a lot of work settings, which are more of a circle setup now. Even though you have a boss, there's a lot more input into how decisions are made. So that's a different mindset, less rigid structure. Food, clothing, and housing are not provided. When people come out of the military, one of the things that we don't think a lot about as civilians is the fact that when you're in the military, you're told what to wear, how to wear it, and which uniform to wear to what event. All of a sudden, let's say I get thrown into my job. I've been in the military for 20 years. All of a sudden, I have to say to myself every day, first of all, where do I buy the clothes? I was issued those clothes in the military. I buy the clothes, and then I wake up in the morning and I say to myself, oh, I'm going to a meeting at the VA today. What do I wear to a meeting at the VA? Nobody's going to tell me. Oh, I'm doing an outreach today and it's going to be a picnic in the park. What's considered acceptable clothing that's still professional in that environment? So you really need to think about, if you're working with a lot of military people who have just come out of the military, sometimes you have to talk to them about, and they're not going to bring it up, but what clothing is appropriate for an interview? What clothing is appropriate for different settings? Because when you're in the military, it's issued to you and you're told when and how to wear it. Doctors' insurance are not provided once a person leaves the military the way it was there. When you're in the military, you go on base, you've got a hospital there, you've got doctors there, your family does, your insurance is provided for free or at a low cost. And now all of a sudden you have to navigate, like the rest of us, that whole network of how do I pick a doctor? How do I find a doctor? How do I find a doctor in network for my insurance? That's a whole new world for somebody in the military who's coming out. Workday ends and work may not be incomplete. I talked about that a little bit. Military mindset is you work till the work is done. You're deployed, you're in battle, it's a 24-hour day thing. All of a sudden, the mindset of a military person has to switch to, oh, I have a wife. Oh, I have kids. Oh, I have to cut the grass on the weekend. I can't go into work all day Saturday. There are other things that are on my plate. So it's a switch. And you have to kind of help military people adapt kind of to that new way of thinking. Loss of camaraderie and close friendships, I talked about already, that guys and women in the military will tell you that they have the tightest unit of friendships in the military, and that is a huge loss for military people when they get out. Military people they just want that connection back, that bond back. This again is a great picture. Veteran family community reintegration challenges, reestablishing a family role, reconnecting with the family, unassisted community adjustment, never applied for a job, post-deployment job readjustment of returning to work. I love this picture because this is a picture that the media likes to put out there. This man, if I'm going to weave a story, I have no idea what his story is. There's a good chance that baby was born while he was deployed. He's been thinking about that baby since the day that baby was brought on this earth. He's been thinking about hold that kid in his arms. He gets off that plane. He runs across the tarmac. There's that baby. And that's probably not what's going to happen. There's a good possibility that when that baby sees him, that's a stranger. That baby's going to cry. That baby's going to pull back. That baby's going to look for mom. And think about if that was a mom that was deployed. She has her baby. She gets deployed for 6 months. She comes back and her baby sees her as a stranger and goes to somebody else or wants someone else to hold him that he's comfortable with, that he knows. So that's more the reality of it. And we have to work with service members on how to adjust to that. How do you slowly begin to get back into your children's lifestyles? My daughter, I raised my stepdaughter from pre-K through high school. And my ex-husband, while he was had left the military, he continued with the military thought process and always worked internationally. He'd be gone 3 months, 6 months, and there's always an adjustment when that person comes back into the lives of their children. The kids want them. They either are really clingy or they're resentful and angry. The wife or the spouse is the same way, whether it's the man or the woman. When that person from the military comes back in, that other person has been at home doing it all. They've been cooking, they've been cleaning, they've been cutting grass, they've been paying bills, they've been keeping up with the vehicles, they've been getting the kids to all their appointments, their doctor's appointments, their activities. So that person who isn't deployed is used to running the whole household. That other person comes back and the person who was at home has to be willing to give up some of those roles. And the person coming in has to figure out how to play out those roles. And everybody has to be willing to allow that adjustment to happen while everyone gets used to everybody again. Never applied for a job. Guys go in the military at 18. My husband's running joke was the only job I ever applied for was Kentucky Fried Chicken. He worked in Kentucky at Kentucky Fried Chicken in high school, went directly into the military, got out of the military. A military headhunter then got him his job getting out. Never applied for a job except Kentucky Fried Chicken until retirement. And post-deployment job readjustment or returning to a job. One of my friends, it was, I actually showed horses with his daughter. He was deployed on and off while we lived near him, and he was a banker. So he was running a bank, and he had the white collar, the full suit, and was in air conditioning in an office with lots of carpeting and lots of nice social things going on. He would then have to turn that life off and be deployed. He would go in as an officer, but being deployed as an officer, he'd be in there fighting right with everybody else, out in the heat without a lot of anything, and working with guys who are rough around the edges, a lot of real cut and dry communication, which is what kept people alive. And then he would come back and have to re-go into that environment that was his banking environment. And that happened at least 3 times that I knew him. And it was, to look at his facial expression when he came back and was in that adjustment phase was, was kind of priceless. Tough thing to come back and forth like that. Veteran family community reintegration challenges. Family and friends are completely new. Veterans completely new. Loss of identity, loss of purpose. If they knew what I saw and had to do, not fitting in. This again is the picture that the media wants you to see, is that when people come back, there's that great reunion, there's a honeymoon phase where everybody is in love and hugging and kissing and so glad to see each other. And after a couple hours or a couple of days or a couple of weeks, that wears off. And then the family has to decide how to fit into roles and how to work with each other again when they actually don't know each other. The service member has experienced a lot of things in those months in deployment. The people at home have gone on with their lives. And it is kind of like a whole new family, a whole new readjustment. And if I knew what I saw and had to do, if they knew what I saw and had to do, that's a big one. Service members carry around a lot of information that they can't or won't share with you about the bad things that happened when they were at war. And you have to be sensitive to, and remember, they may not want to talk about those things. Don't ask them to talk about those things unless there's a reason why you have to. And just be sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of weight that they're carrying around. And not fitting in. When people come back from the military, when they're interacting with other military people, or even when they're living on a base and they're not deployed, they talk to military people about military things. And sometimes you have to actually work with military people that you're working with about, well, when you're sitting on the sidelines at soccer and you're the only guy who was in the military, what do you talk to the guy sitting next to you about? Or what do you talk to the woman sitting next to you about? What are normal conversations that civilians have with each other sitting on the side of the soccer field? Or you're sitting in the church pew and church is over and everybody gets up and leaves and you're walking out and you want to engage with those families that were sitting around you. What kinds of things do you say to somebody who wasn't in the military? This is a model that I found useful. You can pull this off the internet. And it talks about kind of the 4 different dimensions that you want to help veterans or family members of veterans work with: purpose, material needs, health, and social personal relationships. So if you talk about purpose, think in broad terms about how it is that you help a military person or a veteran with their vocation and education. You have to think about the fact that if a guy is 21 coming back after deployment, or 20, he's out of the military now and he wants to go back to college, he's not at the same place as a lot of 20-year-olds are. He's not into like the irresponsible kind of college-y party, study some, play a lot, that you think of a 20-year-old who's, experiencing college. These are guys or women who have experienced war. They've experienced things way past 20 years of maturity for someone who hasn't been in the military. So find some way to help them fit in. You may have guys and women who are 20 years out of the military and they're going to go back to college. How do you help them find a college environment or a setting that's going to work for them? Material needs: financial, legal stability, shelter, access to goods and services we talked about. That's your material needs. I'd like to bring this up. It always reminds me of when I was working in Redstone in Huntsville. I had a lot of guys who were young and they had been deployed a couple of times, and they'd be like saying to me, well, I can't cross the state line to look for a job. I'm like, why? Well, because they have a warrant out for my arrest. And I heard that story more than once, kind of over and over again. And I thought about 18, 19, 20-year-olds, and they, were on base and they were, doing normal things. And what happens is they get deployed and they can't pay their tickets. They get deployed and they had a court date coming up for some little thing that happened to them that, would have been dismissed or would have been a fine or whatever. But they leave. The military says, get on the plane or get on the boat, you're going out. And they don't get to finish out the legal part of it. So sometimes you have to help them unweave that web when they come back of getting all those fines paid and catching up with things so that they don't end up being arrested. Wellness model to health. Again, mental health, physical health, access to health. We talked about, or I talked about, you all are mostly listening, what it was like for someone coming out of the military and all of a sudden they have to navigate the doctors. The other thing with military personnel is they don't tend to, I can take care of this myself. I'm not going to go to the doctor. So some of it is trying to switch the mindset that mental health care is a good thing and that physical health care is a good thing, that it's good to access these different places to try to help you become healthier rather than saying, it's not that bad. I can do it on my own. Social and personal relationships. We talked about that some, how to reintegrate with family, the difficulties with that, the social networks. You have to talk kind of with military people about, again, what conversations do you have? What hobbies do you have? What interests do you have? Where is it that you go that when you meet somebody socially, you can say, hey, here's the gym I work out at. Here's what we talk to when we talk about when we go to the gym. Here's what we talk about at sports events. Just kind of, and how to build those, I don't have military friends on base anymore. I don't live in military housing anymore. I don't have friends automatically that are military friends. So how do I use my hobbies to connect with people? How do I find people that I can interact with? And spirituality becomes a whole nother aspect of, and that goes back to they don't know what I've seen and what I've done. And how do you make peace with God or your higher power or whatever your spirituality is? How do you help people make peace with that and make decisions about what that means to them after they've been deployed and after they've been to war? And then I like to end with this and talk about, the community integration piece. Some of the things that a lot of the groups, I do community engagement for a living. So I just like to point out that if you're working with veterans and they're saying, what am I going to do that I can do with where I might meet other veterans or where I can engage with people, lots and lots of veteran motorcycle clubs. A lot of veterans end up at gyms together. Healing Waters is actually fly fishing for veterans. Guitars for Vets is a group that's in this area. There's tons and tons of little groups of Guitars for Vets, and veterans get together and you can start not even knowing how to play the guitar. They teach you, and then you go and perform or just go once a week and play with music with other people. Outdoor adventure, we have Activet, we have Operation Welcome Home. There's other organizations where veterans can camp together, fish together, hunt together, go to sporting events together. They have baseball and bowling leagues. So there's kind of those kind of activities that veterans can do together. We have On Eagle's Wings and we have Stars and Strides, which are two equine programs that can be geared for veterans. VFWs and American Legions, again, are good places for veterans to find people with like thought processes. And that's it. Victory is always possible for the person who refuses to stop fighting, and not today is kind of my motto for suicide prevention. Our goal is to reach those 11 to 17 veterans who die by suicide each day and are not engaged in VA care, and to work with them on not dying by suicide today, not dying by suicide this hour. And I think that's about it. Are there questions, comments? Anything in the chat box?
So there's nothing in the chat box, any questions, but there was an important resource shared, the 180 request form. So I do want to draw people's attention to that, and I can send that out in the email if you guys would like.
The other thing is, did anybody put in the chat their own military, who they were, if they were military?
think we only had 1 or 2 people. So we have Stephen Klein, who said he served in the Army from 2003 to 2007 as a specialist. And maybe that was only one.
I'd encourage anybody else, if you happen to be military, it would be great for you to put your information in the chat box, you know, if you're willing to let people reach out to you, because I do think one of the best ways to learn about military is to talk to veterans who have actually experienced things.
Yeah, and as you guys, if you are thinking of any questions you'd like to ask, I do want to draw your attention. We have a link to the evaluation survey. If you could please take a second to fill that out, that would be very helpful. And looks like we have someone else say they were an Air Force Security Forces. They served as that. And we have someone else saying they're a widow of a veteran.
And I want to point out the Air Force Security Forces, Laura Francis actually works for our VA, and she's a woman.
I've heard that one before.
So I don't want us to forget about the fact that a lot of our veterans are women today. I think that might be it. We may actually end early. Who would have thought?
Yep, a lot of thank yous in the chat. Yeah, we do appreciate that presentation, Michelle. That was very great. Thank you.
Right.